Welcome to my Django tutorial for absolute beginners. So this is going to be a pretty long series, multiple videos, multiple lessons, because there's a lot to go over in this project. I want to start with explaining what Django is. Django is a web framework used to build the backends of apps. It has many purposes. It can do a lot of things. For instance, it can be like a backend or API for a mobile app or a web app. It can be a fully self-contained web application where the front end and back end are done both in Django. It can also just be used to build something that's maybe like a web crawler, or something that's doing stuff in like cryptocurrency to track coins. And really, the power is to you to do more or less whatever you want. It uses Python as its primary language, and it's very powerful, lots of bells and whistles. Now, who uses it? Well, I came across this list. Some of it might be a bit out of date, and I'll point out what at least I know. For instance, Instagram's always called, big user of Django, and initially it was, fully built in Django. I know since a lot has been like turned into microservices and, kind of re-architected into their own really custom framework to do things like as quick as possible to their exact app needs. But at the end of the day, it was definitely bootstrapped originally with Django fully. So it's a great example. So if you had Instagram back when it first came out, you were definitely using a Django application then. Mozilla, so not the Firefox browser, but their support.mozilla.org website, that's built in Django. Pinterest is built in Django. Again, same things could apply to what I was saying about Instagram. I'm sure they've modified things about it and done some custom stuff because it is obviously a very large platform. But again, bootstrapped in Django. Things like Discuss, Spotify, Bitbucket, which is kind of like an alternative to GitHub if you haven't used it. There are a few other things in here, like some course material, lesson plan places, job search, I guess Opera's website, according to this. Now, YouTube definitely, probably even more than Instagram, has fully, moved away. I've actually never even heard this one before. Definitely check your sources on that. It might not even be correct, but that's pretty cool. And then we have Clubhouse. This is here, a more recent entry, I guess, into the club. And and I can also mention, a ton of other things I've built, for instance, that I've used Django on. I've used it quite a lot. I think it's a great project. What's great about it is, it does have all those bells and whistles that you really need. That solves a lot of the problems. A lot of the time you can just kind of follow the convention and do things a lot quicker than if you were building things from scratch. Where it might cause you pain issues is if you're not really someone that understands it fully and you're just taking over a project and you start doing things not the Django way and work against it. So partly why I want to put this series together is, hopefully teach you what I know about the Django way. And then, there's definitely things like Fast API and Flask and various other things out there, which are great. Nothing bad about them. However, I've noticed, sometimes people will use them because it's easy to get up and running, and then they'll start building their own ORM around it, their own auth, their own, all these things. And eventually, they just end up with something that's basically, as heavy and large and cumbersome as Django, but they had to spend all this time building it. So I think it is a really, great thing for not just prototyping, but going right through to production with. And that's kind of also my personal take on it. It is, I think a great project. It's, of course, open source. Python is an awesome language. And, I think a lot of the times when people say, oh, it's slow, it's whatever, that's usually the developer's fault, not optimizing your data, not even maybe designing and architecting things in the most efficient way. And whether you're using, Node or even Rust or whatever, generally the language itself as opposed to Python isn't going to be the bottleneck. A lot of the times it's the the IO, the talking to the database, all that kind of stuff. So great project, and as we were looking, a lot of companies have used it and have obviously become successful using it. So I think it's the best thing out there for back-end development, and I've done everything in the PHP land to Node.js and Express. I've done some Rails. I've done a little bit of Go, a little bit of Rust, just not very much Rust at all, but a little bit. And probably some other things I'm missing right now, thinking out loud. But, I just think it is, the best thing out there for most use cases. That doesn't mean, okay, I have this idea for an app and like go to Django right away. No, definitely explore. You want to find something that suits the needs. Like if you're building an app that doesn't need users, that doesn't need authentication, that doesn't need an API or whatever, like, reaching for Django, might not make sense. So definitely do not let, the technology kind of guide your app. Instead, let your app guide your technology. And I do want to say, I've been saying the word app a few times. When I use that word, I don't necessarily mean, an iPhone app. App or application, it's a word that's existed long before Steve Jobs coined the App Store. And really building a Django app, even if it never has a front end and it's just like a back end, to me it is, and to the industry really it is a web application. It's an app. So just keep that in mind when I'm using the word app, which I will a lot. I don't necessarily mean, that thing you get from the App Store and download and get a push notification from. It's just software. It's an application. All right, so prerequisites of this course. I'm going to assume you already have Python installed, because if I was to spend a lot of time explaining how to install Python, I'd have to do it for Windows or Mac, for Linux, or various other, M1 versus, an Intel Mac, all that kind of stuff. And there's different ways to do it, and there's tons of tutorials out there. So definitely, if you don't even know how to get started in that sense, do a quick search and come back here once you have it running, because we'll just save a lot of time for people that already have it installed. I'm also going to, assume you have a bit of Python knowledge. This isn't a Python course, although there will be lots of fun tidbits and things that I'll be explaining about Python along the way that, hopefully will be new to you. And, I'm assuming, okay, you can at least make, sort of like a hello world or something, or you've written some Python code before. It doesn't have to be in Django, obviously. That's what this course is for. But, you have a bit of familiarity with that, as well as a basic familiarity and understanding of just web development. That doesn't mean you have to be good at like HTML and CSS and JavaScript or anything in particular, but just kind of understanding like, the general concepts and the difference between a server and a client side. Of course, we'll be touching on these things and you'll be able to learn, but I'm have to kind of set a bar somewhere of like, how beginner is this? And I think if I assumed you couldn't read or couldn't, walk or ride a bike yet, we'd be really starting from the beginning. So all that being said, I'm also going to assume you have a code editor. I will be using VS Code. You could use PyCharm as an alternative if you, want to either pay for it or can get it through like an educational license. PyCharm is really great with Django. I just find, because I'm kind of flipping a lot between backend and front end, I've just got really used to VS Code and it works great with Django, so that's what we will be using. But everything will apply no matter what code editor you're using, even if you want to use Sublime or Atom or something like that. Basically everything will apply. There just might be some slight differences on how you create a new file or access the terminal. Eventually you will need Docker installed, not for the first little while, but that will be coming, and I will walk you through installing that, even though it's really easy to install. It's just like a download, run the package, cool. But eventually we'll need Docker. Other than that, you need a computer. This won't be really something you can do without a computer. I'm not going to try and make and find ways to be like, oh, if you only have an iPad, like here's how you do it. Because I have no idea. I wouldn't even try to code on my phone or on a tablet. But so I'm assuming that too, even though it's not in this list. Now, the topics we're going to be covering, and each one of these kind of is at least my plan per lesson, so per video. So it might change a little bit as we're kind of going. I might realize, oh, there's actually something that, we need to sort of cover that I forgot about that's really important. And there'll probably be tiny things kind of wrapped into these that aren't, thought of right now. But this is basically the structure I'm thinking. We're going to start, and this will be part of this video, just setting up and installing Django. Then we'll be getting into configuration, models, which is where, your data and what maps to your database. We'll be talking a lot about the admin, which is a great feature of Django that kind of gives, the developer and, the staff of the application kind of like a way to manage the data and do support for users and all that kind of stuff. So we'll do that. Views and templates, they kind of go hand in hand. You'll see the difference in a bit. As well as forms. We'll touch on that a bit, just, being able to actually create a form and submit data to it. And then we're going to talk about the ORM, which is the Object Relationship Manager. And that's essentially one of Django's many secret sauces, in a sense. And I know it's not a secret, it's open source, but it's really what I think makes Django really good, the way that you can manage and query data and modify data. Then we're going to get into actually using Docker so that we can have a better dev environment. We'll be using, at that point, Postgres for our database, but leading up to it, we're just going to be using SQLite because it's just a lot easier to get up and running for development. Then we're going to touch a bit on media because that's a big topic. That could be users that are uploading images or, potentially even videos and stuff like that. We're going to get a bit into Django REST Framework, which is a great package for Django to allow you to create a RESTful API and basically make a Django application that's completely headless, meaning there's not a UI per se. It's really just a way for a mobile app or another website built in something like React to talk to your application. We're going to touch on celery and background workers, which is just a great practice for having long running tasks that you don't want to have to wait to complete to give your user back a result, basically like background tasks. We'll get a bit into testing, unit testing, and wrap up everything with actually how to deploy this somewhere. I haven't decided exactly what service I'm going to use. I might actually touch on a couple just to kind of show the flow, and because that's an important part that I see a lot of questions on Reddit about, like how do I actually get this running somewhere? And the practices we're going to be using in building this are going to be set up in a way that, okay, it's actually pretty easy to get it somewhere, and it's containerized. So we decide, we don't want to be on Amazon anymore, and we want to go to something else. We'll be able to move it there pretty quickly. So yeah, that's the topics, and take a quick glass of water if you like, and we'll get into the first part of really the first video now, which is us setting up Django. All right, so again, I have Python installed, and I can show it just by going Python -- version. And as you can see, I apparently don't have it installed. I'm going to do Python 3 version right there. Depending on the way you install it, using either Homebrew or whatever, it might be slightly different. But you want to make sure you at least have Python, I'd say 3.10 minimum, to make sure everything is applicable here. If you're not familiar with the terminal, again, it's something on all Mac and all Linux systems really easily to get to. It also exists. There's things like PowerShell on Windows. Because I am going to be using a Mac for this, I'm not going to be touching too much on the Windows way. And in fact, once you get it at least up and running and your project started, it will kind of be operating system agnostic, aside from some things like setting up, Docker and everything that we'll get to eventually. But everything, really should apply. If you're on Windows, you might just have to do a little bit more searching at this point to figure out how do I get, Python installed and how do I get a terminal open, because, we will be using the terminal quite a bit in here. It is, the best way to do things. And in fact, with Django, we kind of have to use the terminal for certain things. There's not a GUI that lets us just start our server, as far as I know. Maybe there is, but we won't be using that. We'll be doing this properly. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create a virtual environment. So a virtual environment will allow us to have different Python dependencies installed on our computer, but kind of sandboxed in a very special place that only this project will work with. This will allow us to have multiple Django projects with maybe different versions or multiple versions of Python and all these kinds of things without actually worrying about conflicts. If I was just to install Django right to my, root version of my Mac OS, it would work for my first project, no problem. But as soon as I start a second project and I'm like, oh, Django 5 is out now, cool, I'm going to start using that. Well, now I'm using Django 5 on all my projects, and I might have some issues with my older, out-of-date project. So definitely you want a virtual environment. So we're going to do Python 3-m to say we're going to install a module, and we're going to use the venv, and then we're actually going to make the path of where we want it to go. So I'm actually keeping those the same. And this is just, a nice sort of pattern here. So I'll run this and I will get something set up here. So we'll see there's this venv folder made right here. And what I can actually do is source that. And what I do is I use the source command Again, Windows, it might be a little bit different, so please look that up. And we just want to source venv bin activate. So that's just a file inside a folder called bin inside the folder venv. And what that will do is we'll actually see we're in venv now, and anything we sort of do in here in the world of Python is going to be contained within this little world here, which is really nice. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is actually install Django. So I am going to go pip install Django. I'm going to do it with a capital D. And you'll see a whole bunch of things running here. And it's because when you're installing Django, you're not just installing Django. Django itself has a bunch of dependencies that are also being installed. And actually, if I run a command now, let me just clear this out. If I run a command called pip freeze, this will tell me everything inside my virtual environment that's been installed through pip. And we'll actually see here we have Django, but we also have ASGI-ref and SQL parse, because those are just some dependencies that Django has. All right. So now we can run something called Django admin. Now, if I just go like this and hit enter, I'll see, okay, I got an error because there's other things I have to do, but I at least know it's working. I can, of course, run the help here, and there's a bunch of commands I can do. And what we actually want to use in this case is start project. So Django admin start project. Oops. And you actually get IntelliSense with this tool too. So I can just start writing the word start P and hit tab, and it'll actually autocomplete. Now I need to give it a name for my project. And for my purposes, I'm going to call it just DJ Beginner. We'll probably in this course be creating some other projects that are specifically named for what we're trying to do. But for now, just to kind of show this, I'm gonna use this. You can, of course, use anything you want. Then the last thing I want to do, because I'm already in sort of like this folder that I want to be in, and it's the same folder my venv is, I'm going to put a dot. This is an optional command, an optional property we can put, and this will say what folder to put it in. Normally it would make, if I don't do this, it would just make a new folder called DJ Beginner, but I kind of want to just have it right in this spot. So I'll have a period here, and I'll hit enter. So now if we do an ls just to see what's here, we actually see we have our manage.py right here. We have our venv still here, and then this thing called DJ Beginner, which is actually the project, which we'll see in a bit. Now I want to open this all in VS Code, and assuming you have VS Code installed, you can just do code dot, and it'll actually open that entire folder. So I'm going to close this, this instance of VS Code. I don't know what this entitled thing is, but it's going away. And we're going to see, yes, I trust the author. I will zoom this for us a little bit. And now we have, something up and running. Okay. Now the next thing I like to do is make a text file called requirements.txt. And this is a Python convention of all your requirements being in here. And we can look at, again, what was installed just by doing that pip freeze. And I'm not sure what this message is. Oh, I know exactly what this message is. So because we opened up, we have a new terminal session now, we have to remember to activate our virtual environment. So let me just run that again. Source venv bin activate. And just make sure you have that venv or whatever you called it right there. Now if I run the pip freeze, it'll be a little bit cleaner. I won't have that weird error. Now, what we're going to do is we could just store everything in here, and as we install things, we could keep updating it. And in fact, a shortcut for that, we can actually go pip freeze and then a little Pac-Man character, and then requirements.txt, and it will actually put everything in there. And that's totally fine. You can do it that way. It'll just ensure that the versions are correct. However, you might run into issues when you have a lot of dependencies, especially when you want to start updating things. What I think the best practice is only put requirements in here that you actually manually installed. In this case, we only actually installed Django so far, and these were just dependencies of Django. So it's better actually to only keep Django in here, because Django will then resolve and automatically need to install those. So we just keep our requirements file a lot emptier. Now, what's cool is, say we decided to, and I can run deactivate to get out of my virtual environment, and I can actually remove, I'm going to remove rm.rf venv. You don't have to do this part, I'm just demonstrating something. So now that virtual environment's like completely gone. And let's say I wanted to make another virtual environment, Python 3-m venv. Now I would activate that again, and I should see that somewhere in the history. There we are. Now, I could, of course, just kind of go and copy all these things, pip install, I can run this if I want, pip install this, and that will work just fine. However, we can actually go pip install requirements.txt, and it will actually look at your requirement. Oops, sorry, I missed one thing. Pip install -r requirements.txt, and this will look at that file and basically install all the things for you. And that's, something when you're deploying, your server, it's going to go and, run this command, basically everything in your requirements. So this is a really important file to have. So there we have it. We have Django installed. We have our requirements.txt. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is, this is something that it's totally optional, but I love doing this right at the start, is I actually just like to rename this. This is kind of like we're going to have multiple folders eventually in this when we're creating our project and adding new features and new apps, as they call it in Django land. But I kind of don't like it being the same name as my project. And in fact, I prefer using the word project here. So I actually like to rename this project. Now, when you do rename this, we will have some problems, because if you look at our manage.py file, which is a file that Django made, it's looking for a settings module inside djbeginner.settings. So we need to make sure we rename that to project.settings, because now it's going to be looking inside project as we've renamed it. Similarly, there'll be a few other references in here. So what you might want to do is just search for the word djbeginner or whatever you ended up calling this. And we can just kind of go through and make sure that all of them are set to project. And I'm going to just do that. So project, and I'll just put this on my clipboard to make it easier. We want to make sure the URLs are pointed to this, the WSGI application, and lastly, the WSGI file itself pointing to that settings. So now that we have that, it's just a little bit cleaner. Again, that was optional. You could totally call it that. Yeah, I just like, kind of having the root stuff named project, and then, just keeps everything clean and nice. All right, I'm going to open up the settings and just kind of quickly look at a couple things here. In a future video, we'll be going through this much more in depth, but I want to show you databases. So by default, our database engine is going to be SQLite. And although SQLite is really great for development, you would never actually use this in production. You'd want to use something, I'd recommend Postgres. You could get away with MySQL for sure, but in my opinion, Postgres is just the best relational database out there. What's great though, for our purposes right now, is we can use SQLite, and it's just a file system. Basically, it's going to create a file in our base directory called db.sqlite3. And we don't have to worry about things like installing Postgres or setting up Docker or doing all those annoying, sort of things that we will definitely do in this course later. Yeah, I just want to point out that that's the database we'll be using sort of for the initial learning. You can do most things in SQLite that you can in Postgres. There's a few exceptions. Postgres has a lot of extra functionality, JSON fields and whatnot that SQLite does not support. But for the most part, we'll be fine. And what's cool about Django is it's basically database agnostic, except in those rare exceptions of features that aren't supported. So we could, build most of our app and SQLite would be fine, and then decide, oh, we have to go to Postgres, and we don't have to update any code to make that change, other than our configuration of what, database to point it to. So that's just a really great thing about Django. It's not saying you have to use this database, you have to use this one. And even if you make a decision, you can change it fairly easily later, especially if you don't actually have production data yet and you don't have to worry about migrating it over. Okay, so what we need to do now. So talking about databases, Django comes with some of its own database tables. If you don't know what a database is, you can kind of think of it in a very easy way as like an Excel spreadsheet. Each table would be a different sheet or even a tab of your Excel sheet. And you can kind of think of it as like rows and columns of data. If that still doesn't make sense to you, definitely do a little bit of research on your own and come back here, because if you don't really understand what a database is, a lot of this stuff is not going to make sense. So, go check out some stuff, come back. Again, I have to kind of set the bar somewhere of like how beginner this is without boring everyone else. Okay, so it comes with its own tables, its own sort of data structure, and database. Django has something called migrations. It's a common pattern in many software applications, and I think Django has the pattern really locked down. And what we need to do is we need to run those migrations. So to do that, we can go Python manage.py, and manage.py is just a file in our root. So we have to make sure we're in our root directory to run this. And you'll see I got the autocomplete, so pretty sure we're in the right spot. And then we run the command migrate. And you'll see it actually did a whole bunch of things here. It ran, maybe there's like 20 migrations. So stuff for the different content types, auth, some admin stuff, sessions, all that kind of stuff. We don't have to worry too much about these things, but basically what they are commands that have been configured to be like, do this to the database, create this table, add these fields to the table, modify this, that kind of stuff. It'll definitely make a lot more sense when we are making our own models and making our own migration files, and you'll see that all in a future video. Next, in order to test this out, let's just see if our server will run. So to do that, we can go Python manage.py run server. And here I'll see, okay, it looks pretty good. System check, no issues. And I can click on this. On VS Code, I do have to hold the command key in order to click a link in terminal. But we'll see, we have this. The install worked, congratulations. We're seeing this page, Now, this is all great. We know we're up and running. And now, what I want to do is go to /admin. And we'll see in here, it's asking us for a username and password. Now, we need to essentially create what's called a super user in order to log into the admin here. So I'm going to stop the server with Control-C. And what we will run is Python manage.py create super user. And that's all going to be one word. And you can, make your name whatever. I just like to usually do admin and then like admin. And I'm just going to make a basic password here. And then we have to make sure we run the server again, because if I just refresh now, I'm going to see I can't connect because we're not actually running the development server. So I'll run manage.py again. And I'll try logging in with what I just made. And we see now we're into this lovely admin. And we can see some stuff. So like I said, Django comes with some data right in, and we ran those migrations. And we also created a super user, which actually created one user for us. And specifically, it's this user named admin. We didn't give it a name or anything, but we could go in here and, say update this to, whatever we wanted. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. In a future video, we'll be digging a lot deeper into all the things we can do in the admin. But essentially, I'm just going to save this and, we can see cool there. And specifically, this one has staff status. And what that means is they have the ability to log into the admin. I could, of course, create a new user and not give them staff status. And although they'd be a user and they could be, part of your app and everything like that, they wouldn't be able to log into the admin. So you have to have that super user. And running that create super user command obviously automatically, makes them a staff. Otherwise, no one would be able to get into here and actually modify someone to become a user, to be an admin user. Okay. Now, something that is kind of cool that we can do is sometimes, you're working on the project, especially in like early development, and you realize, okay, like, you've done a bunch of work, you made a bunch of database migrations, et cetera, but like, you might just kind of want to start everything from scratch, essentially like reset all your data. Obviously, in a production environment, this is probably something you would never want to do because you'd lose all your data. But in development, especially with SQLite, it is very easy to start over. So I can just literally delete this file, db.sqlite. And now, for instance, if I try and run the server now, you'll see there's unapplied migrations. However, just running the server actually created this empty file. It's basically an empty file right now. So now we would actually go through that whole same process, right? We'd have to run we have to go run migrate, and this will do our migration. We're going to want to create that super user again. Oops. Can't, I gotta actually retype it. Admin. And then I want to do Python manage.py run server. And then we're back up and running. So yeah, just a little bit of a tip on how to sort of like reset your data fully. All right. Lastly, I want to show, I've been typing some commands and, I have them pretty, some of the commands at least memorized, or sometimes I have to look up certain things. But sometimes it's nice to have sort of like a way to run the commands without remembering exactly what they are. So a practice I like to do, and I usually do this right at the start of a project, is actually make a makefile. So it's just the word makefile, no extension, capital M. And in here, we can actually do things like we can have something like run, okay? And this would be like Python manage.py run server. We can also have, our migrate command, and that will run, migrate, and we'll be adding some other things to this at some point. We could also have the create super user one, create super user, and it's basically this, and we can just kind of put files and commands in here, and anything that you can run in terminal, you can basically sort of give it a name and say what to do. And what's cool now is when I want to actually run the server, I can just do make space run. And it will just run this Python manage.server or manage.py run server. So just a little bit easier to remember. When I want to migrate, it's just make migrate, make create super user, although this is something you probably won't be doing all the time. You'll probably just make one at the start. So it's maybe not necessary in a make file, but I wanted at least one more example for you guys. So yeah, I have that, and that'll just make our life easier moving forward. And, if you... It's also kind of like a bit of documentation, right? Like you can be like, how do I run that again? I want to know, you can go to your make file and be like, oh yeah, it's this, like, cool. Or, I can know at least to run make run. So it's just a nice thing to have, and I definitely recommend it. And this is not a Python or Django specific thing. It works on any like Unix operating system right out the gate, and it does work on Windows. However, you do have to install something to make files work. So again, Windows people, if you want to do this, just do a little bit of research on how to get make files working in your PowerShell or whatever shell you're using. Ideally, though, for just speaking of Windows people, if you can use the Linux subsystem on your Windows machine for all this stuff, you will have probably a much better time as a developer in general, as well as a better time following along with these tutorials. All right. So that's all for this first lesson. In the next one, we will be getting into configuration, setting up .env, and going through the settings file, basically this file I have open, a little bit more in detail. So thanks for watching, and any questions, please throw them in the comments. I am here to help.